Okay. You ready?
Let's do it.
Okay. Well, we've made it back for our second round of our podcast, which is impressive given that we are recording these on weekends. And this is the kind of thing that when you start it, you really have to continue it. Otherwise, it's kind of weird to just put one podcast out. So we're back. We're doing it again.
Yeah. In the last 2 weeks since our first episode, I feel like there's been so many things that I've read, I've experienced, I've had happen in my day job, but I'm sure we'll get to some of all of the content. But Kelsey, like what's happened in the last 2 weeks in your world?
Yeah, I think in the last, like this week in particular, it's funny because I've had days where I'm like, AI will never take our jobs because it failed at everything I asked it to do. And then I've had other days where it's like, AI will totally take our jobs. So it's funny to me that there can be such a wide variance in how well AI does some days. And I don't know if it's just individual prompting skill or the models are having errors that day or I'm just not saying the right things, but it was just funny kind of the disparity that we on my team encountered. So like there was one or two or 3 days this week that we who are heavy skills users in Claude, we share a bunch of skills across our team so that we standardize some of our processes and our deliverables. And they just didn't work for anyone. They didn't work for anybody. And it's comical how much noise that can cause. Like they didn't work for me, they didn't work for my colleagues. And it's funny how disruptive that is, especially given that like 4 or 5 months ago, we didn't even have these skills, but we've become so dependent on them and used to them that we have these problems. So I was talking to some of the team yesterday, and we were just saying how funny it is that it can be so disruptive when we're having issues with these for a team of 10. But can you imagine if you were to work in an enterprise like a team of 100 or 200 or 1,000 and have these skills that you're trying to roll out and then have them not work on any given day or have them throw errors, like how disruptive that would be. Like I've just been thinking about that and how challenging but rewarding it can be to roll out a skill and what the iterative process looks like there.
There's this concept that I've heard thrown around called buy the rumor, sell the news. And it's like, okay, a year ago, it was, okay, everyone's going to get laid off and people are replacing their employees with AI. And then about 3 months later, you're like, oh, this company laid off all these people and now they're having to rehire them because AI is not doing what it said it was going to do. And I think it's a really interesting time now to be like an AI leader, an AI officer, an AI leader, however you want to think about it, at organizations trying to figure out how to implement this because it's both extremely cool new functionality and also sometimes it just doesn't work. Sometimes
Yeah.
it just catastrophically fails.
And there aren't really best practices yet. Like people have theorized around different types of prompting best practices. Like I'm sure you've seen on LinkedIn some of the acronyms of the things to remember to include in your prompts and how you often can tell in the prompt you are a software engineer working on the XYZ team. Please build this chunk of script or whatever it is. And I just think it's interesting because like for me, I'm winging a lot of the prompts. I don't typically follow those kinds of methodologies, and I seem to be getting fine and or better outcomes than other people who do. So no one knows. Like, can we all just acknowledge that nobody knows how any of this works, and we're all just like kind of taking a shot in the dark?
Yeah, I think the adage I've seen on places like Reddit is like, make sure you put make no mistakes at the end of your prompt, otherwise it's not going to work.
Yeah, I guess it was like 2 or 3 years ago. I went to this conference and this was like, remember at the very beginning, right after ChatGPT came out, even when ChatGPT like wasn't really up to date. It had like a cutoff of the date that it
Like
was up
knowledge
to
that it
date.
knew.
Yeah, of the knowledge it knew. So this was around that time. And there was some PhD from some university in Canada that I was listening to talk about AI because everyone was just kind of like, wow, what could this be? And I remember his like main takeaway, like his big tip was that if you want it to not hallucinate, you're supposed to tell it, don't hallucinate. And I find that funny now. I just find so fewer hallucinations than we used to, but it's just funny to think about the kinds of things and the kinds of advice that was being given at the time. And we'll probably look back to this period and look back and think, wow, why did we do it that way? So it's just funny how it's evolved.
I feel like the last 2 weeks, just to circle back to like, where we left the last episode, in the last 2 weeks, I have seen more things that have brought me back to being 49% bearish on AI, where there's definitely a lot of functionality, but it's not quite there yet. It still requires a lot of structure, a lot of technique, but in the same way, like a lot of the best practices for these structures and techniques, like these prompting acronyms and all of these things, sometimes they just don't work. And I think we've got a couple of fun stories that we can dig into about, uh, goblins and whatever else. But more on that later in the episode. But the reality that is, we really don't know how this technology works. It is a black box, and sometimes things will work out, and then sometimes you will get hallucinations or dumping an entire database where you didn't mean to. So again, I still remain solidly 50-50 on whether or not this is going to be the kind of crazy improvement or catastrophic unemployment catalyst that I think are the two extremes in the market right now.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I would ask you about how your week was, but what I really want to know is how last night was for you, because we did a little bit of an interesting activity
Are you trying to flex on everyone and let them know how you crushed me
on my
in
victory.
the
Yeah.
competition?
Yes.
Yeah, I think
Do you want me to tee it up with where our project from last night came from?
I think so. Yes.
Okay. So last week or earlier this week, I can't remember. I am generally the grocery fairy of our household. So a lot of the food that originates in our household came due to some of my actions. And that's just part of what I contribute to the Beach family. And a lot of that comes from the Walmart premium subscription for grocery delivery. The more time I can spend not at the grocery store, to me, that is a huge win. So, love ordering a delivery of groceries, but how do we optimize groceries even further? Like, let's get down to the AI component of it. So, I was thinking about how could we build a groceries skill in Claude that could buy anything that you wanted using the Chrome extension that can kind of like click around on your Google Chrome and do certain things for you. And I was telling Dave about this the other day because I tried it and it kind of didn't work because there were some issues that I had with it. And so Dave came up with a way to gamify it, and I'll let you talk about that, Dave.
Yeah, so I forget even why Kit Kats became the object of choice, but we said, okay, we're both fiercely competitive and also didn't really participate in Startup Weekend, so this is our let's build something and compete against each other moment in the household. And we said, okay, let's see who can use AI to get Kit Kats delivered to the house the fastest. And we called it a drag race. So we decided to spend a few minutes building out some skills and some techniques in Claude and see which one could actually fully complete a listed shopping cart order and get it delivered to the house the fastest. And spoiler alert, Kelsey won. I definitely tried to over-engineer mine, but I think it's an interesting thing to talk about because I learned a lot about new functionality that I didn't even know existed within Claude. And I think it is the backbone of some larger skills that we could build where like, hey, all of a sudden you're connecting that to like a meal planning app. And, okay, I liked a recipe on Pinterest, and then the skill can read through and order everything that's on that Pinterest article so that you can make it. So we had a good time with that. But I did lose, but I did produce Kit Kat, and Kit Kat ice cream also was delivered, so that was exciting, and it worked. Once triggered, the AI actually went through, did all the shopping in the list, and put a 20% delivery tip, and got it to the house. And just for the record, we ordered more than just Kit Kats, so there was an actual real purchase there.
Do you want to talk a little bit about your approach to the problem in terms of like what tool in Claude you used, what you prompted, and then I can kind of share how mine differed.
Yeah, I think this is anyone who's trying to automate workflows now is running into the breaking down of problems in kind of a logical and sequential way. And so ordering Kit Kats is not just prompting Claude, go order me some Kit Kats, although that is one approach you could take. But to me, it was, okay, well, what vehicle? Is it going to be DoorDash? Is it going to be Walmart? Is it going to be Instacart? Okay, well, there's some login and credentialing issues there. What about payment? How do we actually get it to execute like a payment? Do we want to give the AI like credit cards, or are there real world constraints here that we want to think about? And so I, of course, was like, I want to create this in a way where I can connect it to Dispatch. And for those who don't know, Dispatch is the way where you can call a skill on your phone through the Claude app. So I can actually just like go on my phone and say, execute grocery skill.
And that's
And
Claude Code, right?
I think so.
I'm
Yeah,
pretty sure it is.
I think you can do it in all Claude ecosystems, but it might just be Claude Code.
Yeah,
Can you
we'll
not
look
do it
into
in
that.
Cowork?
I don't think you can. We've talked about it a bunch at work, and like no one has figured out how to make it work. So I'm pretty confident it's just code.
Okay.
But I digress.
So
Sorry.
so I set out with the goal of being able to order Kit Kats from my phone with one button push, and built out all of these kind of sequential logic steps, and it actually worked extremely well. And even using Claude to ask how to do this structuring was really helpful. It basically said you're going to run into two-factor authentication issues, you're going to run into issues where like there might be CAPTCHAs and bot detection tools. And so, and I'll let you talk about your experience with those things here in a second, but that's where I said I want to create the perfect end-to-end solution where all I have to do is push a button and it does everything. And I did, and it worked, but it took me about 3 hours longer than it took you to do
It took
yours.
maybe an hour and a half longer, to be fair to you.
Well, from when your delivery showed up to when my delivery showed up, it was about 3 hours.
Well, yeah, I can talk about mine. So I think everyone's going to hear the difference between like the A student approach and the C student approach. So I went into Claude Cowork and I said, please use the Chrome extension to order me a Kit Kat from the Walmart app. I'm already logged in, use our default address, and order it without my permission. So that was pretty functional. And I said order it as fast as possible. So it picked the shortest time frame. And it did that. It ran in about 10 minutes. Dave hadn't even gotten a chance to like sit down and open his laptop yet. So it did work. But here is the caveat. So it opened up the link in Walmart in Chrome and it started poking around. And I think it got to the point where it had opened it. It searched for the item and then a CAPTCHA popped up. And it was like click and hold, and Claude stopped running, and it said, "Hey, you have to complete this for me to continue." So I sat there and I like clicked it and held it, and I fixed the CAPTCHA, and it was able to finish. We didn't get another CAPTCHA after that. So Walmart is clearly wise to this type of thing. I would love to like. I think this is a great opportunity for the Walmart Open API. I would love to tap into that. Walmart, if you're listening, please help a girl out. I would love my AI to deliver my groceries for me. But with that said, I think this is kind of a funny conversation and like a little bit of an allegory to solutions in the workplace because sometimes a super, super fast build skill or whatever it is with a human in the loop can be deployed really quickly and it does the job and it does the job with a lot less investment than maybe something that needs to be engineered a little bit more thoroughly with more attention to detail, which is kind of like Dave's approach because yours tapped into Instacart, which did not have a CAPTCHA. And that is super interesting because you, I think, got to the technically correct answer. Mine was kind of the quick and dirty path, but I thought that was a really cool like allegory in terms of how we approached it.
Yeah, I think there's this famous meme where it's what did the customer ask for, and it's like a swing set, and then like what did the engineering team here they needed to build, and it was like a playground, and what did the parents think was necessary, and it was like a daycare facility, and there's all this misinterpretation about what the actual end product should look like, and at the end of the day what was needed was just a tire swing like hung to a tree. And I think we can use that and say, okay, like I like to build things. I like to over-engineer things, and my goal was to have a KitKat backslash skill that I trigger from my phone. But at the end of the day, that might be more technically complex than having an AI where if the use case is just, I need you to go put 100 items in a cart and get the cart ready, and all I need to do is sign off on it, you just giving it a prompt that says, here's the things that I want to add, go do it, works just fine. And if I have to like prove that I'm a human, supervising, that works too. And so, we're going back to the age-old engineering question of what's needed and what is built might not always be the same thing.
Well, and you know what comes to mind too is this head of AI or chief AI officer. First of all, I'd love to get someone like that on the podcast. But two, I think thinking about what that role looks like in different environments in terms of sophistication and size of team and like what you're doing, I think you may not necessarily need to hire the same type of chief AI officer for different environments. Like, I think someone that can get the job done on a smaller team that's in need of like just a bunch of different things to be done, or at least mostly done because they have fewer resources, I think that's a big win. Whereas really thinking through, hey, how is this skill going to run on every single person's laptop in the organization when they run it individually? Before we deploy it, we need to do like extensive testing because it's going to interface with a ton of different systems and inputs. That is a totally different beast and takes a different type of person. So I just think it's kind of interesting to think about it like that too, in terms of like what different organizations need.
Yeah, I think the C-suites are in a really interesting spot now because this is obviously, well, going back to our example of if your goal is to order a Kit Kat, that's great, it works. But is that, how do you take that technology and apply it in enterprise? And I think that's where a lot of people are stuck right now is they're like, okay, this technology is obviously here to stay. It's changing the way we do business. How can we actually use it for real world use cases? And I think one of the interesting things that this Kit Kat drag race showed me was, hey, sitting here and thinking, asking ChatGPT is what a lot of people have a frame of reference for, but it's actually to a place now where certain tools like, the MCP for Google Chrome, where it can actually click around and do things for you. Hey, that's starting to feel a lot more like a staff or like an admin or someone that, and it kind of opened my eyes as to just how capable at least the Claude ecosystem is. And now my head is brimming with all kinds of ideas about how to deploy this. But I think C-suite leaders are in an interesting spot because now it's like, how do I actually apply this? What's the best way to do this and get value out of it?
Yeah, and I mean, I'm going to use a silly analogy here. So in my favorite movie of all time, Ratatouille, there's this thing at the end where they say that not everyone can be a great chef, but a great chef can come from anywhere. And I think the same is true about AI here. I don't think you have to be an engineer to be great with it. I don't think you have to have any certain kind of background. I think there's a lot of different qualities that contribute to being good with AI and making a difference in your organization. But I think the problem that we're now going to run into is that's great. How do we identify people from within that we want to train and promote and give them the keys to the kingdom in terms of implementing AI solutions without putting any company IP or assets at risk because we gave everyone access to Google Apps Script and API keys to all of the different platforms we use and said, go ham. I think some orgs can do that, and that's really cool because that implies that there's a lot of trust there, but I think that can go wrong so quickly. And I'm sure we will hear in the coming months and weeks that crazy stuff has happened in different organizations that tried that. But I think it's the most boring but most important subject of permissioning. Who gets a premium Claude or ChatGPT or whatever account? How do you give them access? How do you empower people to learn? How do you train people? And how do you level them up in a way that is safe for the organization?
Yeah, it's super interesting question because what we used to call shadow IT, right? It's somebody trying to solve problems or build things. It's like, okay, we tell everybody we have a Microsoft or we have a ChatGPT subscription, so only use ChatGPT, don't use Gemini, don't use Claude. And then you find out somebody's using Claude anyways because it's better or not. Like I'm
Yeah.
not saying Claude's actually better, but in the eye of the user. And we're at this place now of we don't necessarily want to discourage experimentation and learning and development with AI, but we also now have created such incredible potential risk. What's the right approach? How do we encourage people to build with this? And I'm going to cite an accounting influencer right now because when Claude came out, especially cowork, everybody was asking questions like, "Hey, can I use this on my accounting clients to do tax returns or bookkeeping?" And ultimately, some of the people who spent a lot more time in this space said, this is still risky. This still doesn't necessarily protect your client's data. Claude Cowork looks awesome, but don't use it for like complex financial or client like financial or tax related matters because you might have some risk there. And it's like, man, well, I want so badly to be able to like have the Kit Kat bot that we just did last night and extrapolate that out and say, can you file a tax return? Can you do this? But I'm not going to do that yet because it is too risky. But I don't know where you draw that line internally and say, okay, play around with this because it's less risky. Don't play around with this because it is. Like, you almost need like a framework or a matrix for like encouraging people to play and learn and build, but do so in a safe and controlled manner. And I don't know what that's supposed to look like.
So, two things there. One, like in a previous organization I worked at, which had sensitive information, they only approved one platform, and then you literally could not open up any of the other platforms, like even in your browser, on a company issued device, which I think that's the best answer that we have right now if your organization is going to implement some kind of policy around that. But frustrating, especially if you're like a Claude fan and it's like, oh, we only use chat or whatever it is. Two, what really surprises me as a Claude admin, and maybe I just am terrible at being a Claude admin and everyone else is doing this except for me, but I don't think that's the case. I don't have any visibility into my team's chats, which is great from a, hey, they maintain their privacy in terms of what they're doing in that tool. But even if there were tools around, it will flag for an admin anytime an API key is shared. Like, I'm really surprised that Anthropic or any of the others haven't really implemented org level tools like that, because even
Hmm.
something like that like wouldn't be as invasive, but it could then tell me, hey, this is the API key that was shared, it looks like it was for this platform, you should tell that user to rotate that key. Like, that would be a super helpful tool, because I think that's, in my opinion, going to be like the number one or number two biggest risk item is people popping those API keys in a chat. So I just find it funny that I feel like the tools for managing your organization are just very immature and just kind of limited right now.
I don't know that immature is the right word. They were
Yeah.
built for a time when the average worker never had to even ask the question, what is an API key? How do I
Yeah.
connect my system to this other system? And now Claude is basically doing all that work for you, and all they're doing is saying, open this file or create this environment variable and drop in these API keys. And people are now starting to ask IT teams, hey, where do I get this key? How do I use it? And before, those were very closely guarded secrets. And it's kind of like,
Yeah.
if you go to the principle of in internal controls, we have a concept of like minimum permissions necessary to do the job. And we're now kind of inverting that in the age of AI, or at least I think that's the
Funny.
question is, should we be inverting that in the age of AI to say, what's the maximum amount we can give you while still protecting the organization so that we can encourage you to play around with functionality? And it's an interesting question because if you lock down this functionality, then other people, teams, companies are going to figure out how to use it to do things better, faster, quickly, more efficient. And then you just lose.
Mm-hmm.
I think you had an idea on a walk on one of our walks of like how to maybe solve that, where you feel like you want to encourage it, but the skill set to understand the risks maybe isn't quite there. Why don't you
Yeah.
talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, that's right. I think one thing we've identified is when you see it, when you've got somebody who's a high potential person and you're like, this person's going to go really far, but maybe they're not technical. Not everyone went to a coding boot camp or has an engineering degree. So when you see someone in the workplace who's asking the right questions and who's using AI in the right way and wants to do their job better and faster and more efficiently, but they're not there yet. Maybe they've never interacted with an API before and they want to automate stuff, but you're a little concerned because okay, is Claude the right teacher of that skill set? Maybe at some point, yes. One thing we were talking about is just what if we grant that person a Zapier account? Because I think first of all, I think the visual of looking at a workflow and seeing, all right, the trigger is this, then the next step is this, and the next step is this, and these things happen in these different platforms, and these are the data points that are interacted with in these different platforms, and these are the permissions granted in these different platforms that we're using. It's a really great visual for that. There are, of course, awesome AI tools in Zapier too. That's a different subject, but I think that's a nice stair step because then it's like, hey, I would like to automate something in this platform, which maybe doesn't have a very good integration with Zapier. And the next step would then be interacting with that API. Well, I think that's really cool if someone can then identify what they want to do and they're basically scoping it for themselves. If they're doing a certain project, they're figuring out what that scope is and asking the right questions and saying, well, this isn't available. I talked to Claude said that there's an endpoint for this function that I want to do, and hey, IT team, how can we make this work? Can you help me out with a really scoped down API key that can just do this like one or two things that I'm trying to do? I think Zapier is a good way to do it. And I don't know, do you have any other ideas that aren't just directly saying, yep, here's
Yeah.
read and write access to everything?
Last week or 2 weeks ago, we talked about, macros kind of being a gateway drug to automation. And this is going to sound like an ad for Zapier. It's not. I've never actually used Zapier,
Really?
but I know you used it previously,
Still use it.
and that was kind of your intro to I can connect system A to system B, and all I have to do is join them inside this location. And I'm like, yeah, and that's, you can definitely do that, or you can do that via Python script, or you can do that via, whatever else. But it was a really, really good way to get introduced to the idea of if this, then that. And you know, they actually have a new tool out now, which is the software development kit. So I've heard great things about it. I can't wait to play with it myself. But the idea of giving someone an ecosystem to explore, not building AI or building code or doing these things, but thinking through process automation and developing that skill. I think that's really, really valuable and important. And so Zapier is a great tool. And there's other ones like Zapier. Make is another good example. But the alternative that I had in my head was, is this a role for somebody now that didn't used to exist? In other words,
Yeah.
in the same way that companies are now hiring chief AI officers, is there a chief, I don't know if you call it like AI safety officer or like a almost, it's an extension of the IT function, but it's
It's like
someone
a,
whose sole purpose is to
yeah.
be that internal tools liaison and basically serve as that like, hey, I can actually tell you where the risk in this project lies, do this instead of that, and basically enable that development function, but that person be the overseer of that. Because I think that's where IT teams today are getting really overburdened and overwhelmed,
Yeah.
is their role was built for one level of doing ticket support and protecting the company's internal data. And now everybody is saying, hey, can you help me build apps to do my job better and faster? And I think that's a new constraint that wasn't placed on them previously. I know I've experienced that in my work world before, and now that's where I think maybe it's not giving people keys to Zapier. Maybe it's that and hiring someone to oversee what used to be called shadow IT is now encouraging people to build their own things.
It came to mind when you just said that, and this is just me spitballing. I almost feel like there's a partnership between a couple of different roles to implement what you just described. And I'm thinking about it like option leveling on your like TD or your Schwab account. Like, okay, I
Hmm.
have access to level 4 options. And if you call Schwab and you just open an account that day, you're like, I would like to, I don't know, trade everything like naked options. Like I want to go crazy.
Selling
They
naked calls.
naked calls, yeah. They will ask you, and you've probably done this, but like they will ask you questions about like, okay, well, how do you do uh cash secured put? Like they'll ask you tiered questions to make sure that your knowledge is such that you're not going to blow yourself up slash them up as a broker or custodian when you're doing these things. I'm wondering if there could be like a leveling system, like depending on the organization size. As a resident IT, basically like pseudo IT person, I get a ton of requests all the time just for normal stuff. And to then add on top of that this new responsibility to grant access and answer questions about building things, I can only imagine how large teams are underwater dealing with those AI questions. So I wonder if a security clearance, AI leveling, or access leveling would be interesting across not just an engineering team, but the rest of the organization.
Hmm.
And it could also be cool if you had a learning and development team that was more technical in nature. That for those people that, hey, I don't know what an API is, but I would really like to learn so that I could be responsible with this. Like, can they administer a course, like an internal development course, where at the end someone passes it and demonstrates they can do XYZ project? And hey, yeah, we're going to grant you an API key, and it's pretty limited in what it can do in whatever platform, but now you're able to do more with your work than you could before because we know you're going to be responsible with it. Like that could be kind of cool.
I think that would be really cool. And I think, candidly, that's an investment that a lot of teams either don't want to or can't make because that's a lot of bodies potentially. I think it's an interesting question because, like, if I think about some of the places I've worked historically, that was like, if you want to teach and learn and train on your own time, that's great, but we're not gonna we're we're not going to encourage you to kind of upset the apple cart internally, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
We like the way things have been done. And, to people who feel like they're at those kinds of organizations, it's hard, right? Like I, I'm seeing the writing on the wall. I'm seeing what's possible. And yet I'm facing a culture of innovation that isn't moving as fast as I want it to move. And, that's where I do think you had a stat about
Yeah.
companies. I
Let me
think
read that
that
up.
maybe, yeah, go ahead.
Ramp, my favorite platform ever. It does your IP, just putting it out there. So good. They did a little study of their own clients and their data, and they recently released that they've shown that the top quartile of AI spenders, so they have companies that have some kind of AI subscription, the top quartile of those spenders on their platform have more than doubled their revenue since 2023. That is an insane stat to me. And I mean, 2023, that's relatively recent, but in AI years, it's like dog years. That's like forever. To me, if I was a business leader, I would be all in on figuring out how to implement AI. If there's that strong of a correlation, how could you ignore that?
I would love to dig it because I'm a perpetual skeptic. Professional skepticism is something we talk about in accounting. I would love to like look at the data behind that claim and validate it and say, okay, is there a correlation here, or is it because you know the only companies that Ramp serves are AI companies, and therefore, like we're seeing all this AI spend right now. That's why they're
Mm,
doubling revenue year over year. But if it's a representative sample of the middle market, and we're seeing that kind of a correlation, one, I think the kinds of organizations that are hesitant to change, you're going to see talent leave to go work at organizations like that.
mm-hmm.
And the other thought I had was, you treat it almost like a bounty or like a bonus program where like we don't necessarily expect you to go train up on AI in your free time and learn outside of work hours. But if you do, maybe there's a bonus or a compensation adjustment because now you can do more technical things and level up the department or the team that you work on inside one of these companies. But I wouldn't want to be taking such a passive position as
Mm-hmm.
a leader in finance and accounting. If I had staff, I would be like, these are table stakes. You have to learn how to do that. And I know that Zapier talks about creating for AI fluency in their
Yeah.
interviews. So I don't know whether in my career in accounting and tax, whether that's necessary just yet, but it's coming.
Yeah. And to your point, I think it would be great for different teams to have kind of like one of those Google programs where Google had their team working on their own projects for what, 5 hours a week or something like that on the
Hmm.
clock. I think the same could be true for AI. And to your point, like I'd love to know in those ramp figures, I'd love to see the revenue stats by industry. Like I'd love to see like
Hmm.
a manufacturing kind of industry versus like SaaS companies, which maybe the uptake was maybe more marginal. I don't know. But the other cool thing about Ramp that kind of pairs with that, they're beta testing this now for existing Ramp users. They have a new tab under their insights portion of their app where you can connect the admin API keys to people's different chat or I think they do it's chat and Claude, maybe Perplexity too. You connect individuals on your team and their keys and it will do token tracking and analysis by person. And I
Hmm.
think that is super interesting because I know the tokens are a hot thing right now. Like, oh, do you overuse them? Do you underuse them? But that's something that we're trying to set up too, just to get eyes into what that looks like for our team. But do you have any thoughts on the tokens? I'd love to hear what you think.
My first thought is, so I want to make sure I understand. So you're saying you're connecting Ramp into, is it like the ChatGPT or Claude instance, and it can tell you how many tokens,
It's
or
kind of the
like, is it?
reverse of yes. So I'm going to take my Claude API key and put it, my Kelsey Claude API key, and put it into Ramp and say, this key is for Kelsey. And it's going to look over time at how much, at my token usage and report in there. And then I can also add my Dave API key. And if he's got chat and Claude, I can add both of those in there so I can get this top down view of how much my team is utilizing AI.
Yeah. So in theory, what you could then do is you could marry up your OpenAI or your Claude bill, and you could say, we've got three $200 a month max plans. Kelsey's blowing hers out of the water. We've got one or two people who aren't using it. Do we, and get some visibility into what the cost is by user. That's
Mm-hmm.
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll let you know how it goes. And I think the thing that's tough is maybe it varies by role because you can have someone that's just talking to Claude all day long, or maybe their prompts and their prompting skills are just not fully there yet. Or you can have, and it'll have a really high token usage, or you can have someone whose role is just very dependent on AI and very entrenched in using it every day, and they'll also have a high token spend, but it doesn't really tell you why the individual's token spend is high. You just can kind of
Hmm.
see that it's high. And so maybe that would be interesting in like an enterprise if it was more of comparing teams and how teams were using it than individuals. I don't know.
I think it's an interesting question. I don't think we're quite yet at the point of trying to optimize for token consumption. I think we talked about how Anthropic was on their $200 a month max plan users. They're losing like thousands of dollars because people who use the max plan are really using it. And we're not quite yet in the now let's optimize for it, because I think ultimately we're going to have to get to a point where AI costs more because it's just famously unprofitable, except for, NVIDIA right now. And when that inevitably occurs, that's when I think you're going to start to see organizations really say, okay, maybe we've invested in this, but now we have to make decisions about who gets to spend those token dollars, who gets to do this. And I don't think we're quite there yet. So I don't think if you're bullish on AI and enabling and empowering your team to use it, you've probably already got a platform that you're paying for, whether it's Gemini or OpenAI's chat platform or Anthropic. But if you're not even asking the question about how to optimize for tokens because you're not even thinking about that as a concept yet. You're still trying to figure out how does this even increase my productivity?
Yeah. And like the way it's so interesting to think about it in that way, like to your point, where people are just maxing out their max plan because they're like, I have this bucket of tokens. I'm going to use them as they should. So that's a selection problem. And shout out to Brian. He had us read this book called Risky Business, who I can't remember who it's by, but it's a great book that talks about in insurance and in other industries, kind of like we're sharing here, people, consumers who have the ability to max out their usage of any given thing if it's health insurance. So once I hit my deductible, what are you going to do? Of course, I'm going to go get as much healthcare as I can. Or if I have like a coupon or some kind of gold status on an airline where if I go on a certain number of flights, then I get free flights for the rest of the year. I'm going to hit that point and then go on as many flights as I can. And that is then super expensive for the company or the insurance company that is offering that deal. And so this kind of interesting behavioral question comes up of, well, if we are offering all of these tokens to people who are on the max plan, then they theoretically will use them all or use as many of them as they can. And so I think at some point you're right, like they're just losing money like crazy when people like us are asking their AI to deliver their Kit Kats. If we didn't have as many tokens just freely available, or if they're priced differently in some way, or I think 2 months ago I saw they had an interesting deal where it's like if you use Claude during off hours for like a limited period of time, you get double the tokens, which was crazy. I would love to know what the experiment results were like for that. But I think those companies are just gathering data right now around how this model is working. And I think you're right. Like, I don't think this is sustainable for them and it's not profitable for them. So they will switch to something. It's their only way to keep afloat unless they're being subsidized else in a different way, you know?
And I think that's the point at which the conversation shifts from, can this do real work, and can it do real tasks of value, to, okay, now how do we optimize it for getting the most value for the most dollars? And our example of like Kit Kats is interesting because for those who don't understand how an AI actually does this, what it's doing is it opens up the browser and then it's taking essentially screenshots. It's taking photos and saying, once I type the word Kit Kat in, does something that results in the search look like a Kit Kat? Okay, let's add that to the cart. And so it's constantly taking photos and analyzing them, and that's really inefficient from a token perspective. Mm-hmm. Those with a knowledge of like web scraping would know that that's actually a pretty simple exercise to do if you use like the Selenium or Beautiful Soup library to like, and that's where these workflows are going to go from get me a Kit Kat, put it in the cart and check out, to, okay, take my list, turn that into a list of searchable projects or products, and then maybe stop running AI and now trigger like some code to run. And then maybe you do it much faster, much more quickly. And there's going to be a world where like maybe that's an API call, maybe it's web scraping. That's the point at which when the costs increase to what they really should be for these companies to make money, you're going to see a lot more pullback on just the blanket use of AI to do everything.
Yeah.
And I think if I can expand on that just for a second, because I'm on a roll now. The idea of where is AI most useful, and I keep going back to using it for really discrete, limited use cases is going to have a much more outsized impact than giving it just a big problem and saying solve it. Like even the shopping problem it could do, but it's not doing it efficiently. And that's where if you were to say, okay, you're going to search for Kit Kat, and the only thing you need to do is decide whether it's product A or product B that pops up that I'm looking for, and everything else is, handled by a script or some other kind of logic, giving the AI such a very narrow problem to solve, I think is resulting in less hallucinations, less errors. Because again, at the end of the day, we still don't know how all of this works.
Totally. Well, and I think that's a good segue if you want to transition over to our product roadmap and check in. Last time you were talking about like your own products and your R&D tools. Like, what have you been working on? What are you working on now?
Yeah. So I was able to implement the generate. I think we talked about. I had a couple things. I had the R&D thing that I was trying to work on, and admittedly, that has not gained a ton of ground because turns out building a front end that mirrors all of the bells and whistles for the tax code is actually difficult. So not as easy as I hoped it would be. But what was very interesting was, I know I also mentioned generating a bunch of like fake invoices for testing on some sales and use tax data. And that was profoundly successful. And so I was able to generate like something like 500 fake invoices
Nice.
that I can now train on. And it's not perfect, but it's it's what you have to do if you're not going to connect like live client data to things. So that worked out well. There's so many. If anybody wants to hear more detail about how I'm trying to use this for like actual practical accounting and tax workflows, like feel free to reach out to me. But I don't know that I want to bore everybody with how like an AP workflow flows through like the accounting system, but just constantly trying to work on building some of those things that we've traditionally done at like the staff one level. What about you? What are you building?
Yeah. Well, first of all, great job on your data. I'm excited to see what else you do with it. But last week we talked about my data warehouse, and it's in a good spot. Like I think the data in it and how frequently it's refreshing and pulling new stuff in is good. I had my week was just basically spent on Claude skills. So what's interesting is I'm trying to figure out the hard work. And it's hard work. Like we have AI, we're not really doing a lot. We're just prompting, we're writing instructions. Speaking English, typing English and expecting a technical output has unique challenges. And again, like this is all new technology, so it's the first time we are inventing the wheel. And for different things, even as simple as an output that's a Word document that needs to be in a specific format, to an output that's a predefined SQL query that maybe has one or two elements that change given the prompting. A skill file, if you ask Claude to create a skill, generally will end up as like a markdown file with just a list of text and a description to Claude of what it should build. And it's very detailed and very descriptive. But I think what we found is that Claude will cut corners if it has the chance, if you're not super prescriptive about what the outcome is. And even if you think your markdown file has been very explicitly written so that you'll get a similar outcome each time, that's not always the case. And so, especially with these skills that we're trying to deploy across a team, we need to ensure that the output is the same and very consistent every single time. And that's kind of what we like arrived at, is like, hey, this isn't happening. Like Claude is taking liberties with certain elements of the output. And yeah, you can sit there and ask Claude, oh, well, why did you choose to do this? Where is the header in this document that should always have a header? But that's really time consuming. And for a process that's supposed to be automated, you are on this slippery slope of, I'm now basically like either rebuilding it from scratch, or I'm spending so long prompting Claude that it's just like a waste of time. And so what we've kind of learned this week is a best practice, or a good practice if nothing else, is to ask Claude to build in technical components to those skills. So like I have a skill that I use for myself that I'm regularly running the same queries for our data warehouse, and the skill in question did not have those queries built in. It was describing to Claude each time what the
Mm.
query should be, and it was rewriting it each time. So I said, hey,
Mm-hmm.
please generate the SQL query. We're going to test it a few times, and I'm going to do 20 iterations of having you run this to ensure that the output is consistent, and then we're going to save the skill. So that has been infinitely more successful in terms of ensuring consistency and quality. But it's funny how you basically have to like test this on your own, and you're arriving at this concept on your own. And you mentioned last night this thing about the ChatGPT goblins, which maybe
Mm-hmm.
you can share, and I'll link into the show notes here, but it reminded me of the same thing. So why don't you tell everyone about the goblins?
Yeah, so, and this was an article that was in the Wall Street Journal, I think 2 or 3 days ago. And it was an experience that a lot of users had over the last couple of months, where ChatGPT is just referencing goblins and gremlins and animals and trolls and things that have no explicit reference to like what the user was talking about. And what was determined was that this was, or at least what they thought, was that this was somehow connected to one of the personalities that it selects when it's giving a response, specifically the nerdy personality, which I'm not offended, but apparently
Exactly.
nerds talk about trolls a lot. But so what they did is they deleted this personality, and they thought that'll solve the problem. And turns out it didn't. And so, you know, what they had to essentially do was create this hard code override at the parent level, if you want to call it that, to say, please don't reference goblins, gremlins, trolls, raccoons, fantasy creatures of any kind unless it specifically relates to the user's query. And I think that's hilarious because that's one, it's kind of reflective of how like you go through the coding journey where you're like, if this happens, then do this. If this happens, then do this. If this happens, then do this. You know, what you ultimately settle on is like a nice, efficient function to handle all of that logic. And even the makers of one of the most ubiquitous AI platforms of all time is still being like, we don't know why you're talking about goblins so much. Please stop doing this. So,
So funny.
you know, it is a black box. It is still uncertain how it comes up with the output sometimes. And I think that's where it's like, okay, we didn't think this was going to be an instruction we had to give it, but here we are. So funny,
Well, it's crazy.
fascinating. Yeah, it's interesting.
It makes me feel better anytime I get questions about AI that I don't know the answer to. The AI people, the makers of the AI, they don't know either. How am I supposed to be expected to know the answers to these things? And like, I'm kidding, but also very serious. But what's so like funny to me to think about is like, okay, I would love to know in salary dollars on the OpenAI team, how much did they spend on solving this problem? And two, how much did it delay the development of whatever their product roadmap is? Because you know
I,
that this had to be like, if we're talking about it, you and I, it had to be a big enough problem that they spent time on it. Hilarious. Like, just,
yeah.
it makes me feel better about myself. But
They had a few too many training sessions where they were just watching like Critical Role on YouTube or Dungeons and Dragons content or something that, you know, influenced the model enough to come up with this kind of thing. I don't know.
yeah, do you think someone like accidentally turned on their ChatGPT like microphone and started recording while they were like at a D&D thing and it just like
Maybe.
ingested all of it? Oh my gosh.
But if that's the
So,
case, then I expect a lot more dragons in future responses.
I mean, I'm not mad, but it's just a little bit bizarre.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think that's all I got.
I think that's it. We've talked
Covered a
about
lot.
I feel like there were so many things we talked about this week that maybe they'll have to make it on to next week's session. Do you want to leave us with, I don't know, a little what are you looking forward to most this week in terms of building?
I don't want to give too much away, but I'm working on some things that center around AI like literacy and fluency
Hmm.
and how to measure that, and I'm excited about that. What about you?
I think
Go ahead.
I hear that, and I think there's some things that we're both working
Yeah.
on collectively that we will probably talk about in future episodes. But I think this week the goal, I've done a lot on some indirect tax and sales and use tax, property tax functionality that isn't quite to the deployment stage yet. It's just been in testing, and I'm excited probably for the first time to really deploy it this week and see if this vision for some automated flows I've had can actually be borne out. Because if it can, it'll be super exciting. More to come on that, but yeah, that's what I've got going on this week.
All right. Well, then with that, we'll see everyone next time. Thanks for
All
listening.
right. Thanks for listening.